Hello and welcome to this latest Experian Marketing Services webinar, One View of Your Customer. My name is Mark Lindsay and I'm joined by my colleague Steve Brister, who's going to be starting us off.
Thank you, Mark. Firstly, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce the Experian Marketing Suite. This slide is intended to provide a high-level overview of our capabilities across 3 dimensions. If we look first at the Identity Manager and consider that identity drives everything, as organisations we must be able to identify individuals and customers across all touchpoints and then attempt to assimilate this information to make appropriate decisions. Experian has a wealth of capabilities which we will discuss in more depth, and this is the focus of today's webinar. Secondly, let's examine the Intelligence Manager. This enables us to discuss the necessity for deep insight into your customers, and it also helps drive identity through you having a more broader, complete picture of the individuals than you could possibly gain on your own. Thirdly, how do we intelligently manage and orchestrate the interactions that we have with these individuals and measure the resultant actions? This also helps fuel the identity of the individual through the capture of information. So we end up in an iterative process of identifying, adding intelligence, and interacting with these customers, and they're all intrinsically linked and help to enable each other. Now let's examine a simple definition of a single customer view. We all have multiple different languages that we use for this, or acronyms. SCV, SPV, SIV are a number that I've heard recently, single person views, prospect views, or single individual views. But whatever you call it, nearly all organisations understand the importance and benefit of achieving or working towards a single view of their customer. At Experian, we have a heritage in integrating huge volumes of data to achieve a single view of the individual. So if we look at this definition, we're talking around aggregation of data, it being consistent and persistent over time, and the importance being the total view of the customer at all touch points. Now let's examine this through 3 different areas. The first benefit is around efficiency. Being able to understand the individual in their entirety, or as close as possible, to prevent unnecessary or potentially damaging marketing communications. For example, marketing to an individual with a product that they already hold, or not putting together permissions or consents across different business lines. If we look at effectiveness, this is closely linked to efficiency, but more around performance of the interactions. So how can we use the single customer view to refine target strategy on the basis of insight and intelligence fueled by accurate identification? And then thirdly, we look at experience. And we flip it the other way and look at the benefits that a single customer view can have for the consumer, the desire for them to be treated personally, and for you as an organisation to understand their current situation. This could be a recent purchase or even a recent complaint or fulfilment issue. Either way, all of this information needs to be aggregated and factored into the marketing and communication strategy to enable a personalised approach based on intelligence and appropriate reaction to your interactions. Now, there's a major data challenge with achieving a single customer view, and we're living at a time where we're seeing an astonishing growth in the volume of data. Experts are predicting a 4,300% increase in annual data generation by 2020, and so the issue that this poses is the need for scalable storage. Looking at variety, we have both structured and unstructured data. Photos, videos, social media playing a greater role than ever before. And finally, velocity, your organisation's requirement to shift from batch processes to real time, and the importance for that for customers to be able to rapidly interact with your organisation through a multitude of channels and devices. Those organisations that are able to quickly utilise that information by recommending, for example, additional purchases can gain competitive advantage. And as the smartphone era increases, as more people adopt smartphone technology, then the rate of data inflow is going to continue to increase as consumers carry with them a streaming source of data. So if we think about all these three things in the whole, we get some increasing complexity in you achieving or being able to achieve one true view of your customer. So let's just have a look at some of these challenges. We spoke about the huge growth in data that is to be integrated, and there are a multitude of data capture and quality issues which act as a barrier to linkage, including data which isn't personally identifiable. When we surveyed organisations that we work with, 89% of those stated that they had challenges creating a single customer view. 43% of those cited poor data quality as one of the primary barriers to success. 39% of those cited siloed departments, that a holistic view wasn't easily available because data was held across different systems within their organisational data estate. And finally, 37% of those talked about technology linkage, technology barriers preventing solutions from talking to each other, making difficult the process of ingesting data into a single customer view. Mark.
So let's just start by focusing a little bit on an introduction to Identity Manager and Experience Identity Manager and how we address the challenge. Well, we view the starting point being very much around understanding the data that is in place already and profiling that data to understand where the gaps are and the challenges are before embarking on your single customer view project. The next step is around capture, validation of data at the point of capture and as the foundation of multi-channel strategy. Data quality management investigates, assesses and improves and controls the data. And it's important to verify data at point of capture. The second step is then linkage. And this is about consolidating offline and online data across both first-party and third-party data. A really important element here is the ability to establish persistent keys that maintain one view of the customer and examine the role of digital IDs within that linkage process. Reference data sets are very important within this, as well as sophisticated algorithms that can be used to connect data points together. The third element is then enrichment, plugging the gaps in first-party data through enriching with a comprehensive data set, for example, the UK adult universe, such as supplied by Experian. It's also an opportunity to supplement contact data, filling in gaps where there is missing information to contact consumers, whether that's address or email data, etc. And then finally, of course, this is not a single point in time. It is necessary to establish these elements and then maintain them and monitor them moving forward. So if we drill into this in a little bit more detail, we recognize that one of the significant challenges that organizations have is around identity resolution. As Steve has already mentioned, we're living in a world where there are increased number of channels, number of devices, and consumers are behaving differently across all of these, creating quite a bit of complexity. And indeed, what we're seeing is that marketers are struggling to personalize communications across channels, with a survey telling us that almost 60% of marketers are delivering the same content across channels, regardless of who the customer is, which can't be ideal for customers or consumers. So the challenge that organizations are facing, and the thing that's getting in the way, is having the confidence that the person that you're trying to communicate with is the person that you think they are, and customer identification and the resolution of the multiple different identities that you have for them becomes very important. And indeed, almost 40% of marketers said that this particular challenge was one of the biggest challenges in accomplishing their goals. So let's look at this identity resolution and linkage challenge in a little bit more detail. The title of this webinar refers to learning more at every touch point. What do we mean by that? Well, as consumers engage with us, they leave little footprints during every engagement, especially online. These engagements are not always associated with detailed consumer information. Sometimes we only get small amounts of data. Sometimes it's incomplete, inconsistent, or inaccurate. And sometimes we don't even know who the consumer is, particularly in the digital environment. So making use of this data and turning it into meaningful insight can be difficult. One approach could be to ask consumers for full data sets at every possible opportunity, enabling us to link it all together very easily. But we know there's challenges with this. In particular, fundamentally, consumers don't like answering questions over and over again, especially if they feel they've already provided the data before. So we have to make do with what we've got. These footprints are very valuable, and especially if you can connect or link them to what else you know about a consumer. This provides the opportunity then to personalize. Successful single customer view projects make powerful use of linkage, the ability to pull together disparate sets of data to create an improved view of the consumer. And it isn't a one-off process, again, it's something that's ongoing, where we should seek to learn more at every touch point. Linkage at an address level is fairly straightforward, but do remember that you need more than technology to do it properly. So for example, if you take my two addresses here, Mark Lindsay at 105 Station Road and Mr. M. Lindsay at 26 Green Lanes, these may well be two records that you have in different databases in your organization today. How do you link them together? Well, technology can't do that linkage on its own. You need third-party data or other reference data to understand that at some point Mark Lindsay has moved from one address to another. And so both records are accurate, it's just that they are accurate at different points in time, and we need that additional data to create the linkage between the two. This is one to keep an eye out and open for. Email is increasingly important, not only for customer communication, but also as a linkage tool. One of the main ways for reaching people through Facebook, Facebook advertising, for example, is to use email address as the linkage. So understanding who these people are, how email addresses link together is very important. And again, it's difficult to link them together without some third party or additional reference data. So in this case, linking the Yahoo address and the Hotmail address would require some other data to create that linkage between the two identities related to myself. And then things get a little bit more difficult in the digital world, where quite often consumers are anonymous, browsing and engaging without sharing personal data. And this leads most organizations to ignore that data, to put it one side. It's too difficult to make any sense of. But I would encourage you not to ignore this data. At some point, you will be able to connect that browsing activity through to some personal identity information and therefore leverage that insight for personalization, analysis, and attribution. So it's well worth considering that. And let's look into that in a little bit more detail. So historically, there was a fairly simple approach to being able to link personal information to an individual's online activity, and that was through cookies. However, cookies have got limitations. There's been a trend developing increasingly for both cookies to be deleted and for browsing to be private. And as such, we can't always rely on cookies to be available on every PC, giving gaps in our picture. And then with the growth of devices, tablets, mobile, and in fact moving into the Internet of Things, there are a number of platforms where cookies simply aren't available, reducing their effectiveness as a method of consistent linkage across all channels. So this brings us into the world of device and operating system identifiers. The challenge that most people will quickly recognize is that there is no single identifier that will work across all devices. So to get a true 360-degree view of your consumer, to do it properly, you'll need to invest in some capability to link disparate IDs and identifiers together, to capture them, link them, and manage them. But don't forget to put the consumer at the heart of what you do. Remember to think about the consumer and what will actually add value to them. For example, most consumers see value in being remembered as they engage with a brand across devices. So this is one area to consider and may well be a sensible starting point for most organizations. Understanding device usage and linking to your single customer view can be very valuable, helping to understand the consumer journey and supporting robust attribution. It can also provide new opportunities to reach consumers, but just be careful about permissions in this area. Just because you can create linkage and target individuals doesn't necessarily mean you should. So I'm sure we could talk about the technicalities and possibilities of digital linkage all day, but for most organizations, this element should really be the cherry on top of the single customer view cake. Make sure you're doing the basics well before attempting more advanced techniques. And with that, let me pass back to Steve.
Thank you, Mark. So as Mark says, we just wanted to bring the slideware to an end, talk about three key basics that you need to strive for. The first is ensuring that you establish a strong data quality foundation. So at the beginning of the presentation, we spoke about the importance of accurately collecting your data and verifying that that data is correct. Secondly, we spoke about the linkage opportunities, traditional linkage in terms of persistent and consistent keys, an address and a name level, but also some of the things that Mark was talking about with regards to digital IDs and the role that that has to play in pulling information together across your data estate. And then, as with all these things, the need to focus on a meaningful business case. So what are the true benefits of having a single customer view? We talked about efficiency and effectiveness, and also the importance and benefit that can be brought to the consumer in terms of you treating them as an individual and personalizing your communications and interactions with them.
So with that in mind, many organizations will be wondering how to get started with their single customer view project. And Experian have got many years of running these projects, both small and large. And with that in mind, we've pulled together what we call the single customer view QuickStart. This is a short engagement where we would look to profile your data using a range of tools and capabilities that we've got to help understand what your data looks like at the moment, and also to identify and show opportunities to link data together to get quick wins. We'll also put some time and effort into helping you build your business case and help you get your project kicked off. So if you've got an interest in understanding more about this, we'll share an email address at the end of this webinar. We'd encourage you to give us, drop us a note, and we can talk a little bit more detail about this particular service. So that brings us to the end of the webinar, but we're going to finish off by looking at some questions that have come in from yourselves. So Steve, just hand across to you for the first one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, the first one that we've had through is it's a simple one, but it's an important one. How do we get more email addresses for our customers? So I suppose I almost want to split this question in half and use some of the terminology that we've used earlier on in the webinar around capture and verification, and then also around enhancement as well. So I think the first point is Experian's got a wealth of tools that can enable you to accurately capture an email address at a point of interaction with the individual or with the customer. And there's two elements to that, really. The first one of those is checking that the email address that you capture is synaptically correct. that it's presented in a true email format, and secondly, that the domain name contained within the email address is actually valid. In addition to that, we do operate something whereby we can actually ping the email address to confirm that we believe that it will be able to receive an email to it, i.e. it is deliverable. The second point is around enhancement. So we deal with a number of clients whereby they would like to have an email address to enable them to market to a customer, but haven't had it provided by that customer previously or captured it during any interactions with them. We have a repository called Channel View that contains millions of email addresses, and we undertake projects with clients to take their customer data within Experian, match that into the Channel View repository, and compliantly enable that email to be passed back to them for use for marketing purposes.
Thanks, Steve. And we've got another one here, which is relating to how quickly can you expect to launch a single view of customer. So really talking about how long it takes to implement a single customer view, I expect. And this is one where I think a lot of organizations try and aim for the perfect single customer view. They try and get all data connected across the organization, and that can be quite difficult, and it can take a significant amount of time. And therefore, many projects can hit the rocks, if you like, and sometimes not complete. So our recommendation is to take a pragmatic approach to single customer view projects. Identify those quick wins and identify those areas where you can get something in place within 2 or 3 months. We run a number of projects, and sort of 3 months would be quite typical for the design and implementation of a single customer view that can be operationalized and then can be used as a foundation, so you can then add additional functionality as you progress. But we'd certainly encourage to go for a quick win to keep the momentum and the enthusiasm in the organization. So it does depend, and clearly getting a good start is important, and I'll make a plug for our QuickStart service that might help you with that particular process.
Okay, I've got another question here around linkage analysis, around whether Experian can help undertake linkage analysis retrospectively, or whether it's something, you know, the linkage needs to be set up at the beginning as part of the infrastructure. The simple answer to this is yes. So I've undertaken a number of projects with clients whereby they may have data on their customers sat across 7 or 8 different platforms. They will have natural keys within their organization that are meant to be unique to a customer, that are applied using certain business rules. And when we've actually taken that data in across those 7 or 8 different systems and analyzed it using our keying methodologies and our reference data sets and knowledge bases, we've been able to actually identify some issues within the way that that process is working. An example of this would be a business partner ID, for example, that is meant to be unique to an individual actually being allocated to more than one. Or even more common than that, and almost going back to Mark's example, whereby there are 2 records that at a point in time are accurate, but as an organisation, due to a lack of third-party data, you've not been able to actually recognise that Mark Lindsay at one address and M Lindsay at another address are in actual fact one and the same individual. So yeah, there's plenty that we can do there to help.
Cool. And last question here relates to how do we marry online, such as apps and desktop engagement, to offline, such as in-store activity, which is a very good question, and one that particularly relates a lot to the retail environment, but also leisure and entertainment and travel industries as well. And it's a tough one because it very much depends on what data is captured offline. By definition, if you like, the online environment is associated with data capture, whether it's cookies or email addresses. A lot of data is captured during that process. In the offline environment, you may not have that same data capture, and fundamentally, if you don't, then any linkage is going to be very difficult. And that's why many retailers, for example, have established loyalty programs with loyalty cards providing an opportunity to create direct linkage between personal information and a transaction, a purchase in a store or a visit to a cinema, whatever it might be. Once you've got that personal information for the offline activity, you can then link it maybe via email, maybe via address information or other sources of information to that digital data that you're holding. If you don't have suitable data for offline at a personal level, don't forget that there are opportunities to aggregate data and provide insight, even though it's maybe geographically aggregated information. So there are sources of data. Experian work particularly in one area around spend information per postcode, and that allows us to actually, even though we can't attribute it to an individual, we can make some inferences about propensity to have spent during a certain time period. So that can be quite useful. But yeah, it's a good question, and very important to understand what data is available at those different touch points. So I think that is all the time that we've got for questions during the webinar. If you have any further questions, please do get in touch with us at marketing.services@experian.com. And in particular, if you're interested in knowing more about the single customer view QuickStart service, then again, drop us an email at that email address and we will get back to you promptly. Thank you very much for listening.